My own son left me at a nursing home on my birthday. The automatic doors exhaled cold air and the smell of lemon disinfectant as Ethan pressed a supermarket cake into my hands, the frosting sweating under the plastic dome. Fluorescent lights hummed above a Welcome Margaret banner taped crooked on beige walls. My sweater stuck to my skin from the August heat, and my heart felt heavier than the suitcase he wouldn't quite meet my eyes to take inside. "It's for the best, Mom," he said, voice crisp like a voicemail, and the nurse's clipboard snapped shut as if sealing me in. The community room TV muttered an afternoon talk show, and a woman in a wheelchair clapped offbeat to nobody in particular. I could taste the metallic tang of panic as Ethan kissed my forehead, one sanitized peck, and backed away like I might change my mind. Balloons bobbed at the reception desk, one already deflating with a soft hiss, and my birthday candles sat unlit, the G in Margaret missing. Papers slid toward me, emergency contacts, preferred pharmacy, and my hand shook so hard my signature looked like a stranger's. When the door sighed and swallowed him, the silence rang like a bell. A week later, in that same room, the bingo board had been replaced by the Powerball drawing, and I watched numbers bloom across the screen while the night nurse chewed chips. My reading glasses slid down my nose as I compared the ticket I'd bought on a whim at the Shell station, before all this, to the glowing numbers. 12 matched, then 26, then 34, and my breath turned thin as tissue. By the time the red Powerball hit, the room was spinning, and the cake knife clattered from my lap to the linoleum. $100 million sat in my trembling hands like a second spine. You want to know how a respectable woman like me, Margaret Reeves, 67, ended up parked under a short-term stay sign on her own birthday, and 7 days later, holding a ticket that flipped the power dynamic of my entire family. I'll show you the quiet messages I ignored, the favor that turned into a plan, and the moment I realized I wasn't discarded, I'd been underestimated. Stay with me as I trace every choice that led to that door closing and that fortune opening. And if you believe that dignity has no age limit, and that life still serves second chances, subscribe to hear stories like mine. The cardboard crackled in my hands as I folded the lottery ticket over twice and slid it into the little pocket of my cardigan where I usually kept a peppermint. The room around me stayed the same, TV murmuring, a plastic Halloween pumpkin already out even though it was just August, a staff cart wheeling by with tiny cups of thickened water. But inside, something had shifted like a picture straightening on a wall. I drew my hand back to my lap and rested it there. Casual, as if nothing was different. The night nurse, Shonda, the one with the kind eyes and the crunchy chips, licked salt from her fingers and said, "Lucky numbers?" without looking away from the screen. I thought of answering, but my voice wouldn't balance on the tightrope of that moment. I nodded toward the TV, toward the swirl of balls and the bright smile of a host paid to be cheerful. "It's a lot of numbers," I said. Shonda grinned. "Ain't that the truth?" She reached for the remote and turned the volume down a notch. The community room fell back into its usual hush, the kind that makes you a little more aware of your own breath. Back in my room, I checked the ticket against the numbers again, then again 2 more times with my reading glasses perched on the end of my nose. The digits lined up in a neat, impossible row. I had to sit down to consider the fact that my name and my age belonged in the sentence with that amount of money. I signed the back with a pen that skipped once, and then behaved. My hand steadier now than it had been a week ago when the admission papers had trembled under my name. I wrote Margaret, in the looped way my mother taught me across a Flintstones handwriting workbook on a kitchen table that is, by now, a memory more than a piece of furniture. I tucked the ticket into the seam of my sweater and threaded the tiny hole closed with the needle from my mending kit, a habit from years of sewing on buttons for a son who always left for school without half his shirt fastened. The quiet part of me, the one that never speaks unless asked, said, "Wait. Do not rush. The world will still be there in the morning." When the lights dimmed in the hallway, I lay in the dark and tried every part of the world on like a coat. I imagined the West Side Market, tomatoes red as hearts in neat pyramids, fish packed in ice. I imagined the lake, a sheet of iron most days, flashing silver on the rare afternoons it softened, seagulls arguing in the air. I imagined my own driveway in Parma, the cracks filled with summer weeds I used to pull up by hand, The flagstone path I edged with marigolds because they stand their ground against anyone. And if flowers have personalities, marigolds are the stubborn aunt who stays until the pie is gone. People sometimes think old women don't plan. They think we drift. They forget we are the ones who held the map while the person driving said he could find his way by instinct. I am a woman who knows how to tuck away for the long winter. I have stretched every dollar of a widow's pension over 2 decades, hung laundry to dry over the bath to save a few coins on the gas bill, driven the extra mile to the cheaper grocer and back again before my shift. Plan, my mind said. And I did. The morning routine at Maple Ridge Post-Acute and Rehab begins whether you slept or not. The CNA came in with a gentle knock that almost mocked the word gentle. "Good morning, sweetie," she sang, and drew the blinds so the day could come in. I sat up, stiff in a way I earned honestly through years on my feet at a hospital desk and at a stove. Breakfast was scrambled eggs that were more yellow than eggs usually are and rye toast cut so neatly I thought a machine had done it. I ate it all. Power, I have learned, sits better on a full stomach. After breakfast there is a parade of modest indignities, a form to sign for a new medication, a reminder to use the call button, a soft sound from the hallway when someone else remembers something they had kept to themselves too long. I brushed my hair, the gray of it no longer a surprise to me when I catch it on the pillow, and clipped it back. I put on the sweater with the mended seam and ran my fingers over the tiny knot of thread. I thought of calling Ethan. I held the phone in my hand and watched my name on the screen. Mom, it reads, as if that's my whole name. As if that single sound summarizes a lifetime of grocery runs, permission slips, and nights in folding chairs at school. Plays pretending to laugh the same amount at every child's joke. I let the phone drift back to the tray table without dialing. Ethan's voice, the last time, was businesslike. "It's for the best, Mom," he'd said. A phrase you can put in a greeting card if you want to talk around something. I know my son. His thoughtfulness thrives when life leaves him space. When it is tight and he is tired, he turns tidy and brisk and relocates tenderness to a shelf marked later. I have been that shelf too many times. He was born on a gray Thursday in late March at Metro Health, when Lake Erie still wore its winter, and the crocuses had been brave enough to poke through anyway. The doctor set him on my chest, and I felt a fierce quiet settle in. It wasn't fireworks. It was more like a vow spoken in a small church, like the way you fold a blanket around a sleeping child without waking them. Robert stood by the window, sunlight stuck in his hair, and he said, "He looks like you," which meant he liked what he saw. We were poor by the kind of math that shows up on tax forms, but we had enough. We ate pierogies fried in butter on Fridays from the Polish stand at the market, and pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving even when the oven ran hot on one side and the crust burned a little. I'd pack thermoses of chicken noodle soup and sit at the little table in the school cafeteria to eat with Ethan on cold days because he didn't like the noise. I was there for everything. The forgotten science project about the water cycle we rescued from ruin with a poster board and a hairdryer at midnight, the 8th grade dance where his tie hung too long, and I taught him in the reflection of the microwave door how to make a knot that wouldn't slide away. When Robert's job at the plant went and the second shift at the discount store offered their fluorescent lights to anyone willing to stand, I took them willingly. I kept track of the store's inventory in a green ledger, then went home to keep track of our lives in a blue one. I didn't go back to school for the degree I had almost finished because nights were for stocking shelves, and days were for Ethan. When Robert's chest pain in the middle of a game of catch in the backyard turned into a memorial service with ham sandwiches and coffee in styrofoam cups, the ledger changed, but the vow did not. I learned how to change the oil in a car I could barely afford, and the trick to stretching chili into a second dinner with a can of tomatoes and a little more cumin. When Ethan's college acceptance letter arrived, the paper crisp and official, I slid my wedding band into a velvet pouch and walked to the pawn shop on State Road. The man behind the counter waited in his square palm and gave me a figure without looking up. I nodded and put the money in the blue ledger under a new line. Ethan, deposit. I never told him that. A mother's good lies are the ones that leave a child more confident and less worried than reality would allow. He went to Ohio State with a duffel bag and a toothy smile, and I sat in his empty room with my palms pressed to my knees, thinking my job was to make the edges of the world softer for him wherever I could. When he started his design firm later, North Coast Creative, a name that made it sound like a boat, we celebrated with cupcakes in the kitchen. He had ideas that brightened his face. Ideas need money, though. Things did not always go smoothly. When a client didn't pay and the rent needed to be paid, he came home to my kitchen table where bills have met their resolutions for decades. "Just a bridge," he said, and I bridged. My 401k, such as it was, went into his balance sheet. The blue ledger grew crowded with his name, and soon enough, his wife's. Kelsey brought gluten-free crackers and a certain way of running her eyes over a room as if it needed straightening. When they had my granddaughters, I kept their playroom stocked with crayons and patience. Kindness, I had been taught at church on Sundays, is not a loop we close to feel virtuous. It is a way of carrying wood for a neighbor's fire when ours is lit. But months ago, favor began to harden into expectation. It happened like ice forming on the edges of a pond, almost pretty until your foot goes through. After I fell on the back steps in the spring, nothing broken, just a scolding bruised hip and a scar on my pride, Ethan arrived with a folder that looked like the others I had always kept in stackable bins under the bed. He had tabs to make everything tidy: medical, financial, contact. "Just in case," he said, and slid the power of attorney paperwork in front of me. "We should be smart." He put his hand over mine. "It's only if you need it, Mom. It's responsible." He was right. I signed. Responsible is a word I have lived by. He began to take over small things, my prescriptions, the reminder calendar on the fridge that he replaced with an app on my phone I never really learned to open. He announced he had moved some automatic payments around to make things easier. When I balked, he laughed and said, "It's 2024, Mom." As if that explained the way the world changes the locks on you while you think you are still invited in. The stories people tell about a mother losing her memory and a son stepping in are familiar, and sometimes they are even true. The stories about a mother losing her authority while a son recategorizes her as an obligation are whispered, and those are true too. There were whispers like that in the way he handed me a printed itinerary for where I would be on my birthday. Short-term stay. He said it with the certainty of a tour guide at a museum. Maple Ridge is top-rated. Rehab on site. He promised the bathroom at my house would be remodeled in the meantime. He pointed at a brochure with a photo of a woman my age under a tree that grows nowhere in Ohio because the sky behind it was too blue. "They have a bingo night," he added, as if that sealed it, like I had always been a woman to choose a life around whether a room offered me marker-stamped cards. "Ethan," I said, "I only wanted you to look at the peeling on the porch. The rest I can manage." "Let's not be proud," he said. "Let's be safe." So I wrote my name on lines. I let him fold my cardigans into a bag. The automatic doors exhaled that lemon scent as we walked in. He handed me the cake because giving me a cake is easier than accepting a truth. He would call, he said. He didn't take the suitcase from the trunk. The first week was a drudge of being new. Everyone calling me Margaret, with bright, cheerful voices like tour guides of my own life. The bed that isn't my bed. The TV volume set just below what I can hear well. The nail polish in the activities room, the color of cotton candy. I may not be quick with apps, but I know when a nurse is charting my agitation as elevated because my tone grew less than sweet. I know when the social worker, just following up, has a pre-printed form about competence folded slyly on her clipboard. "Your son is so attentive," she said, her eyes not unkind. "He'll be here Sunday to talk through a few things." In her smooth tone, I heard the click of things moving forward without me. And then came the numbers on the screen, and the ticket in my hands, and me sewing a seam in a sweater, like a woman with a secret you cannot see. You learn, when your life becomes small, how to use the corners. I needed a corner that wasn't in this building. Shonda adjusted the wheels on a man's chair and asked me about my birthday cake. "Chocolate frosting, always," I said. "Any other kind is an argument I don't have time for." "You make me want cake," she laughed, the sound bright in the hallway. "You need anything?" "A piece of paper," I said. It sounded like nothing, a small request. She brought me a notepad with flowers at the top. I wrote down 2 names I could trust. Eileen from church, who still makes lemon bars for funerals and has never once told a secret, and Pastor Linda, who keeps confidences like she keeps plants alive, quietly and with patience. I called Eileen first. "I need a ride to the bank," I said, "and I need you not to tell a soul where we've gone." She paused without shock. "I'll bring my blue Buick," she said. "Tuesday. We'll say it's a follow-up at your doctor's off Brook Park. An outing form is a piece of paper that assumes you will return." The clerk at the desk had my file already out because Ethan had called ahead. "Sunday, yes," she said into the phone as she made a note. I listened to her, and pressed my lips together. Shonda watched me and raised an eyebrow. When the clerk hung up, I leaned in politely. "I have a scheduled appointment Tuesday," I said. I did not explain. "You don't overfill a short cup. It will splash." "Sign here," the clerk said, sliding the form toward me. I wrote, with neatness, the name of Eileen's old Buick and the doctor's name as if my handwriting could create reality out of ink. Tuesday morning, Eileen drove up to the curb wearing the same navy cardigan she'd worn to choir practice for 20 years. Shonda winked at me. "Look at you two, Thelma and Louise," she teased, and handed me my purse. "Bring me back a donut if you pass a shop." In the car, the air smelled like peppermint, and a little like the air freshener tree that had been hanging from Eileen's rearview mirror since 1998. "You're sure?" she said, as the turn signal clicked a patient rhythm. "I am," I said. I unfolded the seam I had so carefully sewn and took the ticket out. Eileen kept her eyes on the road. "That can't be what I think it is," she said. But she didn't make it a question. "We'll go to KeyBank first," I said. "Safe deposit. Then I will call a lawyer," I thought. "A real one, not just the one I have in my head who drafts moral language and nice phrasing and never sends anything." The bank manager was courteous, but not overly so, which comforted me more than kindness would have. He watched me sign the card for the box and took the ticket with 2 fingertips as if it were delicate. He asked no questions I did not expect. When he slid the box into the private room and closed the door, it felt like closing my hand around something I had been afraid to hold too tightly. Pastor Linda's nephew works downtown, in an office where everyone wears sensible shoes and talks gently about very serious matters. Estate planning, his card says. He had once come to the church picnic with a smile too big for his face and a new baby strapped to his chest in a sling, and I remembered thinking it was a kind choice to bring a baby out where older ladies would want to hold something small. I called him from the parking lot of the bank. He didn't make me feel old or foolish or dramatic. He said, "Let me connect you with a colleague who does lottery trusts." And I wrote the name Anita Patel on the flowered notepad with a notation. "Call before lunch." Ms. Patel's voice on the phone was like a calm day on the lake. She asked me to come in, if I could, or to let her come to me. "My office is on East 9th, she said. "But I've been to Maple Ridge before. They serve surprisingly good banana pudding at their holiday party." We met in a tiny conference room with a view of a parking lot and, beyond that, a sliver of the lake if you tilted your head. Ms. Patel presented me with a list of decisions to consider. Lump sum or annuity. Trust names. Anonymity, which in Ohio means a little privacy is possible if you put the money in the right shape under the right names. Using the money to change my life without letting it change me. She did not push. "You have time," she said. "Not a lot, but more than most people think." "I am not going to tell my son yet," I said, and the words surprised me with their firmness, like stepping down on a stair and finding it solid. "That's your call," she said. "What if I could help you structure it so that you could make decisions without having to consult the power of attorney you signed? We can revoke and reassign." She explained a revocation, a springing power contingent on a medical determination I trusted, not just one man's bad mood. She slid the forms over as if she was sliding me an extra place at a stiff supper, and I signed with the pen that didn't skip this time. "What do you want, Margaret?" she asked me last. "When no one's listening, what would you do with this ticket if it were a voice of your own?" I thought of the quiet room at Maple Ridge with its beige curtains and the one plant I keep alive with careful drips from my plastic cup. I thought of the women who push other women down the hall, The ones with cardigans like mine and stories like mine and families who love them in tired ways. I want my keys back, I said. I want a lock only I can open. I want Sunday dinner at my table again, even if I burn the rolls. I want to pay the woman who paints our nails enough that she doesn't have to rush. I want Shonda to have a little house with a garden. I want the social worker to use a different tone of voice when she says my name. Ms. Patel nodded. Some of that we can handle with a pen, she said. Some of it we handle with patience and time. 2 days later, a letter arrived at Maple Ridge addressed to me, but written by someone who never thought I'd open it without help. In the matter of guardianship of an incompetent adult, the words glared up at me. The letter invited me, politely, to a hearing at Cuyahoga County Probate Court, according to a date circled in red. Ethan's name wore the title petitioner, with a weight it hadn't earned. My mouth went dry, and then it watered as if I'd eaten something sour. Shonda walked in on me with the paper still in my hands. She looked at it once and made a noise that could have been sympathy or irritation. "You got a lawyer?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I do." "Good." She pulled a chair closer and sat. "You want me there that day? On your side?" "I want to invite everyone who thinks I won't come," I said. "I will arrive early. I will wear a blue dress." The day before the hearing, I called Ethan. "Can you bring the photo albums when you come?" I asked, as if the albums were all I needed him for, as if I hadn't stored every photo in my mind, and as if I didn't have a copy of that mind pressed into print by my own calm. There was a pause. Background noises of a life I used to be inside. A microwave beep. A child asking for a cup of water. "That's not a good use of time, Mom," he said. "Let's focus on the fact that you're in the best place. Is the bathroom finished?" I said. I could make my voice tidy too when I want to. "Contractor's behind," he said, and the air around those words felt thin. "My keys?" I asked. "Let's not get caught up in details," he said. "We're talking about safety." I hung up and looked out the small window at a slice of sky, as blue as the table in my outdated kitchen used to be, after I scrubbed it with the green side of a sponge. I thought of how love and control can look similar from a distance, and how the difference becomes obvious when you need something, and the person who loves you tells you you shouldn't want it. Routine is a comfort and a trap. In the mornings, I shuffled down to the therapy room, where a young man with hair like a field in the wind put ankle weights around my calves and said, "We're going to build back your strength." In the afternoons, I read to Mrs. Dwyer down the hall, a former schoolteacher who could not remember her own children's names, but could recite Mary Oliver by heart. I hummed hymns with the chaplain, even when I did not know the verse we were on, because I know the shape of how a body sits when it trusts you to hold a harmony. At night, I watched a show about people baking improbable desserts, and I could not understand why they were always surprised when the sugar burned. And in the spaces between, I met with Ms. Patel, or spoke to her on the telephone when I could sit quietly in the garden patio without the women who liked to hover. We named a trust I could live with. The Second Spine Trust, I called it inside myself, because that's what this felt like. An invisible support under the skin of my days. On paper, it took on a more sensible name. A trustee who was not my child. A bank that would not answer to any voice but mine in matters that counted. A small list of gifts on hold, like bowls lined up on a counter waiting for a ladle. Sundays at Maple Ridge bring an extra roll on the tray, and a visit from families in clean jeans. The lobby hums a little higher, children's footsteps like rain on linoleum. Ethan arrived with Kelsey and the girls, who ran ahead to press sticky hands into my palm. "Grandma," Madison said, her front teeth missing and her words charmingly compromised. "We made you a card." It was a drawing of a woman with triangular hair, holding a balloon in a square room with a smiling TV. Children draw the truth no one else wants to. I hugged them, soaking in the weight of their small bodies, trying to stain my memory with their warmth in case someone tried to bleach the edges later. Ethan pulled a chair over. Kelsey sat on the edge of the bed and folded her hands. She wore a fitness tracker and looked like she might time my answers. Ethan's eyes slid toward the nurse's station. He liked to talk where voices official enough to back him up could hear. "We have a hearing on Wednesday," he said. It's a formality. He used the word formality like a blanket. Here is warmth, he meant. Here is structure. I imagined folding his words into a drawer and closing it. It is many things, I said. It is not that. Kelsey leaned in. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. If something were to happen. She let the sentence wander. You haven't been yourself, she added, and I thought of all the selves I have been. Which one did she mean? The one with flour on her hands? The one making calls to insurance companies that put me on hold? The one who sat in a Chevy at 5:45 a.m., drinking coffee that tastes like energy and hope? Do you remember when you asked me to co-sign the second lease for the office space? I asked Ethan, and his expression shifted as if I had taken a turn he didn't expect. I did not say, if something were to happen. I took your hand and wrote my name on a line. That is what trust looks like. My voice stayed gentle because anger in a room like this turns into a note in a chart. Kelsey's mouth shaped itself into patience. She patted my knee. She is not a cruel person. She is a person who believes a schedule can keep the world from leaning. Ethan took my hand, warm and familiar. We will make good choices, he said, smiling in the way men smile when they've already sketched the outcome. Behind his kindness was the steady hum of him moving pieces on a board not everyone else knows exists. After they left, I went down to the garden and counted the bees. I thought of the women I had known whose sons carried their groceries and, in the same trip, carried away their right to decide what was in the bag. The bees worked without fanfare, legs thick with gold. The hibiscus tilted its face to the sun like it knew its worth. On Wednesday, I put on the blue dress. Shonda came in early to help steady the zipper. You look like a woman who knows something, she said. I do, I said. In the waiting area at the courthouse, a television showed the news with the sound low. People waited with their own files on their laps. Birth certificates, death certificates, papers that make relationships formal. I saw Ethan across the room. He stood when he saw me like a good son does. Kelsey smiled at me with all her front teeth and none of her back ones. Mom, Ethan said, you didn't have to come early. I did, I said. I like to know where the exits are. We sat. He adjusted his cuffs. We didn't talk for a long minute, and in that minute, I watched him as if he were a stranger. He was the boy who scraped his knee in the driveway and walked into the kitchen without crying because he knew a kiss and a Band-Aid were waiting. He was the young man with ink on his fingers from the printing scale at Kinko's. He was the father who put sunscreen on the noses of his girls with a careful hand. He was also a man who filled out that petition, and he would have to be all those things at once if he wanted to talk to me. Ms. Patel met us in the hall, her suit navy like my dress. Mrs. Reeves, she said, I filed the revocation notice and your updated directives. The judge has them. She greeted Ethan pleasantly. He looked at her with calculated politeness. He did not know where to put her. The hearing was not a movie. It was quiet and methodical, a stack of facts with soft corners. The judge had a face that said she had read things she didn't enjoy and would do it again tomorrow. I answered questions with complete sentences, and when my tongue wanted to get sharp, I bit it. Ms. Patel asked that the doctor who evaluated me be allowed to read her report into the record. Mild slips, she said into the microphone, and then looked up at the judge. In the normal range of aging. No clinical evidence of impairment significant enough to warrant guardianship. The judge nodded, as if we were all in agreement with gravity. The petition was set aside like a magazine in a waiting room that no one needed. Ethan's mouth pressed into a line. He was surprised. He had believed in a narrative he had written, and now the chapter had turned without him. Outside, on the steps, the wind off the lake was cooler than it had been. I want my keys, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Yes, ma'am, Ethan said, and in the yes was a breadcrumb of the boy I had raised, polite because he had been taught, not because he wanted to be. He drove to my house and handed them over. The porch was still peeling. The bathroom was not finished. My teapot sat on the stove where I had left it, a circle of dust under its curved belly. I put water in it and lit the burner. The sound of the burner made me feel more like myself than any paperwork ever could. Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets. Mom, he said softer. I was trying to do the right thing. You were forgetting things in the house. I have forgotten things all my life, I said. Sometimes on purpose, sometimes because I had too much to do. The kitchen still fed you. The house still kept you warm. He sat at the table without being invited and ran his hand over the worn wood I had refinished after Robert died. I get scared when I think about you falling, he said. It makes me feel 12. Then we are both remembering things that make us feel younger than we are, I said. I made tea. We drank it. He didn't apologize, not exactly. He looked tired. My anger loosened its coat. I did not tell him about the ticket. Secrets have their own schedules. I will not set an extra place at my table until I decide who should eat. Back at Maple Ridge, I taped a page of a seed catalog inside my closet door. Daffodils, crocuses, marigolds, plants that know how to come back at the first chance. I went to the community room and watched a woman in a wheelchair clap offbeat to the music playing low from someone's phone. I began a list in my flowered notebook, names of aides who needed a scholarship, the way the afternoon light falls across the garden bench, the jokes Mrs. Dwyer tells twice in a row and still finds funny. The life I have right now, with its trays and schedules and TV hum, is not unworthy. It is mine. The money in a dark bank box and the documents on Ms. Patel's desk will not change the way the lake looks at me, but they will let me decide which bridge I cross and when. The next day, Ethan sent a text. Pizza on Friday? The girls want to see you at the house. Kelsey can pick up the photos. He attached a smile that reads the way a conciliatory hug feels. I typed back, yes. I will make salad. I could feel the old routine reshaping itself around a new rule. I will choose. I called Shonda and told her I'd be out for supper and did she need anything from Dave's Market. Cherry tomatoes, she said, the little sweet ones. And tell me everything when you get back. In the quiet between phone calls and knocking carts, I opened the curtain and let the late afternoon in. My room glowed beige gold, the color of cookies right before you take them out of the oven if you don't want the edges too dark. I touched the seam of my sweater where a secret had sat for a night and felt the sturdiness of what I had done with it. Power doesn't roar, I thought. Sometimes it sits very still and waits for you to notice you can stand up without holding onto the rail. There is a larger conversation coming. The son I raised will want to be heard. The mother I am will want to be seen. There will be a day when my changed circumstances will be a fact he has to make room for, like an extra chair around a table that used to seat 6, and now must seat 7. It will be loud, perhaps, and there will be pauses and the considering of what a family means when a ledger this big arrives in the mail. But the ground under my feet is different now. I am not at the mercy of anyone's signature but my own. And on the day I open a door, any door, it will be because I put my hand on the knob and decided to turn it. Friday came with the kind of heavy heat that settles even the birds down, and I rode back to my house in the facility van with a little plastic bag of cherry tomatoes for Shonda and a larger paper sack balanced on my knees with romaine, cucumbers, and a red onion the size of a fist. The driver made small talk about the Guardians game and how his cousin once caught a foul ball barehanded. I answered politely, but my mind was already in my kitchen, rolling out the old blue mat I use when I chop, finding the glass bowl with the crack that looks like a river and never leaks. I opened my front door, not the facility door that breathes lemon into your face, but my door, and stood there for a moment to feel the air of a house that knows me. It smelled faintly of dust and the lemon oil I use on the banister. The marigolds I'd planted along the walk in June were still standing their little guard duty, orange heads steady as if nothing in the world had happened in the space of 8 weeks. I set the tomatoes on the counter like a small offering. The faucet coughed once, then ran. I washed lettuce, shook it dry, and set it in the bowl with a care that would read as ridiculous written down. And yet it was the kind of care no one sees and everything relies on. Ethan knocked, and then he was there in my kitchen with Kelsey and the girls ahead of him. The girls ran in with the velocity of children who are sure of their welcome. Madison climbed onto a chair to reach the magnets she'd arranged into a crooked smile on my fridge the last time she'd been here. Ellie asked if she could stir. I handed her the wooden spoon that has stirred every soup and cake and, once, a batch of papier-mâché paste for a school project, and she spun the salad bowl like she was turning a globe. Kelsey set a pizza box on the table and clicked her watch, then smiled without showing her teeth. "We kept it simple," she said. "Half pepperoni, half veggie." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Gratitude is a bridge that serves both ways. I laid out plates. Ethan opened the cupboard without asking because habits are stronger than drama, and pulled down 4 glasses, then looked up at me. "Where do you keep the napkins now?" "Same spot," I said, and he found them. His hands looked like his father's did by the time we were in our 40s, veined and competent. We ate. The pizza was better than the cafeteria food at Maple Ridge, and also not as sweet as the stew I'd make if I had my usual heft of time. The girls told me about their school assembly, where someone in a mascot suit danced to a song about washing your hands. Kelsey asked which paint I would pick for the bathroom once the contractor came back around. "A soft gray?" she suggested. "It feels clean. I'll pick a color I want to wake up to," I said, and she nodded, which could mean agreement, or simply the recognition that I was speaking. Ethan cleared his throat halfway through his second slice. "We won't keep you long," he said. "I know you get tired." "I get tired when what I'm doing is boring," I replied, with a little smile to soften it. "This is not boring. I talked to the social worker," he went on carefully. "They'd like to extend your stay just a bit, to make sure your strength training really takes, fall risk, and all." I speared a tomato and let its bright taste fill my mouth before I answered. "They'll need a better argument than a color-coded bracelet." Kelsey reached for the napkins. "We all want what's best for you," she said in her small, deliberate voice, smoothing the edges of her paper like she was straightening out a map. Ellie, who is 6 and has no patience for caution, leaned forward. "Grandma, can we make cupcakes next time at your house?" "Yes," I said, decisively enough that even the adults heard the edge of it. "We will make cupcakes next time at my house." After dinner, Ethan stood and opened the hall closet without my asking and took out the stepladder. "I'll change the light in the back porch," he said, which is what he does when he doesn't want to keep talking. He does a job, and he thinks the job stands in for the conversation. I wanted to tell him I'd changed that porch bulb alone for 20 years, and only once dropped the bulb and only twice forgot which way to turn. I let him do it. He climbed carefully, and I saw the boy in him again, the one who asked for help the first time, and then learned to do it himself. When he came back down, he wiped his hands and looked around my kitchen like a realtor. "We should fix the little crack in the ceiling," he said, pointing. "We should," I agreed. After they left, the silence in the house was not sad. It was like a book closing after a chapter you will reread later with more patience. I washed the plates even though the dishwasher is perfectly serviceable. The motion soothed me. And then, as I was drying the big mixing bowl with the river crack, the doorbell rang like it had somewhere to be. It was Eileen at 9 o'clock at night in her navy cardigan with a manila envelope in her hands and a look on her face. You get when your casserole starts to burn and you need to pull it before anyone else notices. "I thought you'd want to see this before it sees you," she said, and handed me a glossy postcard. In big, friendly font, it said, "Coming soon." Underneath, a photo of my own living room. My couch with the throw I'd knit in the winter of the year after Robert died. The lamp with the ceramic base from the church rummage sale. My coffee table with the little scratch from a toddler race car that had gone rogue. The address was mine. The square footage turned into a number that felt cold. The realtor's name I didn't know, and a phone number I would not dial. Eileen pressed her lips together. It came to my box because they sent them to everyone on the block. My mouth went dry and then did that funny thing where it waters like you just bit into a lemon rind. I turned the card over. There was a line that read, "Single-story living for an easy transition." That phrase made my back go up straighter. A transition to where? And for whom? I called Ethan. He answered on the second ring, his voice already bracing. "Mom?" I held the card up to the phone as if sound could carry pictures. "I got your advertisement," I said. "Coming soon." He exhaled. "It's just exploratory," he said too quickly. "We didn't have a date. We're thinking long-term. I thought the contractor could meet with me and you thought you could list my house while I was in a place you chose and have me return to find a different address under my feet," I said. I kept my voice calm, the way you do when you're speaking to someone who is already overexcited. He started to talk. I held the space. "We will not sell this house without me," I said. "We will not list this house without me. We will not touch one drawer without my hands opening it." I did not add things like never, or because, or after all I have done. Those words do as badly as gasoline when you think you are putting out a fire. "I was trying to plan," he said, softer now. "It's what you taught me." "I taught you to build a plan with the person it affects at the table," I replied. We hung up. Eileen sat at my table while I made 2 mugs of tea, even though it was late. We drank them without sugar. She put her hand over mine on the table. "I know it isn't my place," she said, and sighed. "But they are moving too fast. They are moving in the wrong direction," I said, and the words came out of me like a stone being set in place. That was the moment, if I am honest with myself, when something in me steadied into that shape people mean when they say, enough. Back at Maple Ridge the next morning, I felt the facility in a new way, as if I had put on glasses that made the edges sharper. The cheerful art on the walls looked more like noise. The breakfast tray had runny eggs again, and the toast had been buttered in the center and nowhere else. The aide who always leaves my door a little too open called me Maggie, in a tone that would not have changed if she'd called me honey, or sweetheart, or ma'am. In the therapy room, a separate therapist I hadn't met yet picked up a bright yellow bracelet and said, "We're going to put this on, okay?" The way you might talk to a child about a sticker. "What does it say?" I asked. "Fall risk," she answered, pausing to make it sound less ugly. "It's just a label so everyone knows to keep an eye." "Everyone has eyes," I said. "They can use them without the help of plastic." Shonda, passing in the hall, caught my glance and lifted her chin in approval. The therapist's smile tried again. "It's policy," she offered. "So is calling people by their names," I said, and held out my wrist to show I could comply without surrender. The plastic caught the light. It felt like a little shout on my arm. After therapy, in the activity room, a volunteer passed out coloring pages of fall leaves, even though it was still August. I took one and put it on the table without picking up a pencil. Across from me, Mrs. Dwyer's daughter leaned in too close and talked about her mother as if she weren't there. "She doesn't like the green beans," she said to the aide, pointing at the tray like she was pointing at the weather. Mrs. Dwyer, who had spent years of her life teaching children to read, folded her napkin into a small square and willed herself to be patient. I watched it all like a person watches something small drip somewhere it shouldn't. Occasionally, it is the drip, not the flood, that ruins a ceiling. By lunchtime, I had a plan more solid than the kind you roll around in your mouth to see if it tastes like action. I called Ms. Patel. "I need to use some of what we tucked away," I said. "Not for the big things yet. For a gesture that is a statement." "I like a good statement," she said. "Tell me." "I want to host a gathering," I said. "Not a party. A gathering. In the community room at Maple Ridge, where I walked in with a cake I didn't want and a banner spelling my name without its last letter. I want chairs enough for the residents and the staff. I want the social worker there and the administrator in his suit. I want Ethan and Kelsey and the girls, and Eileen from church, and Shonda. I will ask Pastor Linda to say a blessing. And I would like pierogies and sausage and sauerkraut from the West Side Market, and lemonade, and a cake from Corbo's with my name spelled correctly in marigold-colored flowers. I will bring my wedding cake server, that silver one with the handle that looks like a braid. It has sat in the drawer under the tea towels for 47 years. Someone gave it to Robert and me as a gift with a little card that said, "For the sweet things you will share." I would like to have something sweet to share in that room that is mine to offer. "What would you like on the invitation?" Ms. Patel asked. And I loved that she said when, not if. "Neighbors and friends, join me for an afternoon of thank yous and next steps," I said. And the date, and the time, and my full name. We called the administrator to request the room, and he said, after a polite pause, that it would be lovely to have a resident organize a little appreciation. I did not tell him that he would be appreciated and held accountable at the same time in the way that a woman your mother's age is able to do with a sentence constructed well. I went home in the afternoon with an outing slip signed and filled out correctly to retrieve the cake server. In the drawer, under the tea towels, it waited wrapped in tissue that had yellowed into the shade of old book pages. I unwrapped it. The light found the silver and made a tiny shine on the kitchen ceiling. I ran my thumb along the braid. It carried a history that did not weight me down. It steadied me, like the strap across your waist on a roller coaster. Says both this will be scary and you won't fall. I put it in my purse and sat for a minute at the table. The blue ledger was in the sideboard under the placemats. I took it out. My handwriting filled lines and lines, tallies of gas bills, marks for checks written to cover a boy's big dreams and the groceries that kept the boy fed while he dreamed them. I set it next to the cake server, a past sitting with a present in the shape of metal. On the way back to Maple Ridge, I stopped at Petiti's and bought a packet of marigold seeds. I slipped them in the pocket of my sweater, the one I had sewn a seam into to protect the lottery ticket that first night, and the seed packet settled there like a small square promise. The injustices accumulated on the days between the plan and the gathering, like dust under a couch you move to vacuum. Small things. The fewer our choices, the more loudly small things speak. The hairdresser in the salon clipped my hair into a shape I did not ask for and said, "There we go, that's tidy," as if tidiness were always the goal. The nurse charted my refusal to participate in trivia when I told her I would be reading. The social worker stopped by with a new form and said she needed to just review a few safety questions, then read in a voice careful like knives. "Do you ever feel confused about where you are?" I said, "Sometimes when people talk about me like I'm not in the room." On the second afternoon, the aide collecting laundry took my sweater, the blue one with the mended seam and the tiny knot of thread, and when it came back from the basement, it had someone else's cardigan folded into it, and the smell of the detergent was wrong. I held the other person's sweater. It was pink and soft and had pilled under the arms, and I thought of its owner and of how someone would miss it and not know how to ask to have it returned. I walked down to the laundry room myself. The man sorting clothes looked up, surprised to see a resident. "Ma'am?" "My sweater," I said. "It is blue and mended like a woman who knows the weak spots of her own life." He looked confused and then earnest. In the end, he found it in a pile and handed it to me. He said, "Sorry," like someone who meant the word. I carried it back to my room, folded over my arm like a flag. In the hall, the social worker caught me. "We have your care plan meeting on Thursday," she said. "Your son will be here. We'll go over next steps." "No," I said, and enjoyed the way the two letters sat calmly between us, instead of turning into the argument someone might expect. "We will have a gathering on Friday," I told her. "There will be thank yous and next steps, and we will all be there, including you." She blinked. Then she nodded, because there is something about a woman in her 60s who uses her inside voice to say a decision that makes people obey. Friday came. Eileen arrived early with Pastor Linda and a tray of lemon bars like she had clutched them through a storm. I asked a volunteer to hang a banner straight, and when she asked what I wanted it to say, I said, "Just my name," and spelled it letter by letter to someone who wasn't thinking about the surname. I pronounced each letter as if I were calling a roll. The West Side Market delivery came with steam still rising off the pierogies, burnt butter smelling like someone's grandmother is alive, and in the next room. I whispered to the woman who'd painted my nails earlier in the week, "There's a box of polished bottles I think you could use in the back. Bring them out after we eat." And she squeezed my hand. The community room filled with the hush of people about to be fed and uncertain why there were flowers on the buffet table. The residents rolled in, some pushing others, some pushing themselves. The aides lined up along the side, glancing at each other with the relief of being invited to sit where you usually stand. The administrator came in with the social worker, both of them wearing the expressions people put on when they think a surprise might be either cake or complaint, and they hope the first will be larger than the second. Shonda breezed in at the last minute and kissed my cheek in the way of a person who knows the exact amount of affection your skin can bear without feeling looked at. Ethan came with Kelsey and the girls and stopped in the doorway, like he'd been invited into a place he thought he knew, and found different furniture. He had that wary smile that says he thinks we are all on the same page, but he's got his finger holding his spot in the previous chapter. I stood near the front of the room with Pastor Linda to my left and a folding table to my right laid out with food. On that table, Tucked between the lemonade and the plates, I had placed the cake server wrapped in its tissue. It looked like nothing until you know what it means. That's true of most important things. I took a breath. The hum of the air conditioner filled in my pause. The arm of the plastic banner waved a little when the unit kicked on. I raised my voice enough to carry without shouting. "Thank you for being here," I said. "Some of you call me Margaret. Some of you call me Ms. Reeves. A few of you have tried Maggie." And there were small laughs, which broke the ice like a spoon tapped against crystal. "Whatever you call me, I'm grateful you came. I told a story first because people will listen to a story when they won't listen to a point. I talked about being a girl at a long table with a Flintstones handwriting book and a mother who corrected my letters with a pencil that wrote softer than mine. I talked about a blue ledger that habitually carried our life and the choice I made to use it on behalf of someone else so many times that the ink bled through onto the next page. I kept it slight enough that no one could accuse me of trying to make them cry, and strong enough that no one could pretend not to understand me. I walked through these doors," I said, "on my 67th birthday with a cake someone handed me, when it would have felt better to pick up my own fork and feed myself. I have signed many papers in my life. A mortgage, a permission slip for an overnight to Cedar Point, a consent for surgery. Admission here felt like something else. It was not wrong for someone to want to take care of me. It was wrong to take my care out of my own hands. I looked at Ethan then, not as accusation, but as acknowledgement. He looked back, and his face was something I was not ready for. He was listening past his defensiveness. I could see it. People always tell you scripts, what they will say next. The hardest thing is to stop reciting yours to yourself long enough to hear someone else's. In the week after that day, I continued, I did something small and something large. The small thing was, I tucked a piece of paper into the seam of my sweater and sewed it shut. The large thing was that I decided to take back the map. I met a woman with a navy suit and a good listening face, and we drew the lines of a life I choose. In Ohio, you can, if you are careful, be wise with a windfall. If you are lucky, you can be wise without one. I am both careful and lucky. I reached into my bag and took out the seed packet. It made a little whisper as I turned it between my fingers. I held it up. These are marigold seeds. I plant them every year because they are polite to the garden and rude to the pests. They're sturdy, bright, and they smell like someone told them a joke. People underestimate them because they come in those cheap flats at the grocery store in May. But they are the reason the tomatoes make it past the rabbits. This, I said, tapping the packet gently, is my symbol of the choice I've made. Then I took the tissue-wrapped cake server and unwrapped it with a drama I didn't plan on. The tissue crackling like applause. Light caught it again. This belonged to Robert and me, I said. On our wedding day, we didn't have a lot of silver, but we had promise. This has cut every celebration cake I have ever had. Today, it will cut one more. But before it does, I am going to use it to do something else. I slid the cake server under the edge of a crisp white envelope and lifted it up into the air. This is my discharge notice, I said. Filed and approved. This is my way home. The room made a sound. Exhale, murmur. Oh, I thank you, I said, turning to the staff, and I meant it down to my bones. You have held my elbow when I was unsteady. You have brought me water and not made me ask twice when I was embarrassed to need it. You work hard, I see it. I am not leaving in anger. I am leaving because I can. Then I set that paper down and picked up another envelope, this one with a heavier weight. And this, I said, looking at the administrator and the social worker with a calm that came from somewhere I had been storing courage for years, is a grant. The trust that will carry my life from here forward has set aside funds to be used for Maple Ridge. The details are in your hands, sir, I said to the administrator. And in your hands, I added to the social worker, and in the hands of Ms. Patel, who will make sure they are used as we agree. The funds will go to 3 things. 1. Scholarships for CNAs to advance their training. 2. New chairs with arms in the community room so people can stand up by themselves. 3. A fund to cover the cost of outings that are not medical, so people can go watch the lake or walk through the market or buy a single apple just because they want it. The only condition is this: you will write on the wall in the staff room, in a frame I will pay for, a sentence that says, "Dignity is our first policy." I want your new hires to look at it and believe you mean it. Shonda pressed her lips together and then laughed softly in that way that is the front door to tears. "They'll have to look at it," she said under her breath. The administrator swallowed. He looked smaller, in a good way, the way someone does when they lay down a piece of authority they wore too tightly. "And," I finished, turning to Ethan with my heart beating in my ears, "I have something for you." I held another envelope, the one I had sealed last night with a care that made my palms damp. He took it. He didn't open it right away. "It is not a check," I said. "It is an invitation. There will be help for you and your girls in the form of a college fund and a cushion against a business month that runs lean. It will not come out of my kitchen or from the corners of my blue ledger. It will come from a trust that belongs to me. The help comes with expectations I think you will call boundaries. You will not sell my house without me. You will not put my name on a petition like that again, without sitting at a table with me and Pastor Linda and Ms. Patel and looking me in the eyes. You will not call me only to tell me what will happen. You will call me to ask where I would like to stand when it does." He looked down, then up, and the boy I raised was there with the man he has become. I saw shame visit his cheeks, and then I saw resolve. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And this time the yes felt like the beginning of a sentence he intended to finish later with specifics, not like a period he wanted to drop at the end of mine. Kelsey reached for his hand. Her mouth got ready to say something defensive and then decided not to. That restraint was a gift she put on the table, and I saw it. The girls came up to the edge of the table where the cake sat, round and frosted with marigold flowers. Madison whispered to her sister, "Do we get some?" And Ellie said, "Wait, Grandma is making a speech," with the seriousness of a 6-year-old who has learned that adults do important things when you are patient. "Pastor," I said, turning to Linda, "would you say a blessing?" She patted my hand and stepped forward, and then in her quiet minister voice, she said words that thanked whatever listens for rooms where people change their minds and for the way a person who has been put in a corner can discover it is a starting line. She asked for wisdom for administrators and tenderness for people who are tired in their backs from lifting others. She asked that the house at 11205 with the peeling porch paint be a place of cookies and arguments and laughter, and that the marigold bed hold its own. She asked that those who had been humbled by this day carry that humility home without losing their authority to do good. We said amen, like a group of people who had not planned to say it together, and somehow did it with one voice. I picked up the cake server and pressed it into the cake. The weight of it felt right in my hand. I cut a piece and put it on a plate and carried it to Shonda first. "Chocolate frosting," I said. "It's not an argument. It's a fact." She laughed, took it, and then I cut for Mrs. Dwyer, for the woman who had clapped off beat, for the administrator, for the social worker, for Kelsey, for Ethan, for the girls who ate the flowers first. I cut a piece for Eileen, and one for Pastor Linda, and one for myself. The frosting crept onto my fingers, and I licked it off like someone who is not embarrassed by her joy. After the cake, people ate pierogies and asked for seconds. The aide with the laundry came up to me and said, haltingly, "That thing you said about dignity? I will write it in my language and put it in my locker." Someone put on music. Sinatra, likely because he is the only man allowed to sing in most spaces with women my age without being told to turn it down, and people swayed in their chairs. The social worker came to me and said, "You are right. The questions need a different tone." When it all thinned, and people drifted back to naps and vitals and television game shows where someone guesses prices and everyone pretends they don't know the cost of milk, I stood with Ethan near the window. The afternoon light had tilted into the color of baking cookies. "I did the postcard before the hearing," he admitted. "I shouldn't have. I thought I was being proactive. That word used to get me a promotion. It doesn't read the same in a kitchen." "No," I said. "It does not." He put his hand on the windowsill. "I hate the thought of you falling," he said. I hate the thought of you falling too, I answered, and he smiled the smile of someone who just noticed a thought can work both ways. He cleared his throat. Mom, the thing you mentioned, about a windfall. Yes, I said calmly, making space for the question without rushing to fill it. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to tell me, he said. He looked at his shoes, then at me. I might not be the first call next time, but could I be the second? You might be the first if you learn how to answer before the fourth thing, I said, and his laugh came out unexpectedly warm. If you are looking for a single instant in which a person becomes a new thing, you will be disappointed. That's not how people turn. We do not flip. We lean. But sometimes there is a moment you can point to and say, there. That's where the orbit shifted. When the room had emptied and the banner with my name had stopped fluttering, I walked down the hall to the reception desk. The same desk where a week earlier, a chipper sign had misspelled me. There was a cluster of balloons there, because balloons are cheaper than understanding. One had sagged downward, already tired of its assignment. I set my purse down and signed the discharge paper with a pen that wrote like a needle through cloth. Cleanly. The young woman behind the desk smiled at me like someone who has not been trained to feel threatened by a person older than she is making a choice. She slid me a folder. I slid her a thank you note I had written for her with a gift card tucked in. Her surprise was the kind that lifts a day out of its shape and puts it back down more gently. Shonda walked me to the door. I set aside your tomatoes, I said. They're in your locker. Bring them home. She lifted her eyebrows and shook her head, looking at me with that specific appreciation women who have worked in service give to women who have quietly refused to be serviced past the point of good sense. You got a ride? She asked. I have my keys, I answered, holding them in my palm. The weight of them felt like something returned from a long trip. Eileen's out front with the blue Buick. We walked to the automatic doors. They sighed. The lemon smell sighed with them. The first time I had walked through them, I had felt like the building had inhaled, and I had gone in with the breath. This time, the door opened because people had built it to open when someone stepped forward at the right pace. I stepped. The door obeyed. The air outside was hot and tasted like grass. The sky over the parking lot had the funny color Ohio sometimes makes in late August. Not quite blue, not quite white, like it's baking something and isn't sure how long it will take. Eileen waved. Behind her, the lake was a suggestion more than a sight, a line in the distance you could mistake for a cloud. I slid into the passenger seat and settled the cake server in my lap with its tissue wrapped around it again. I had one last stop to make before home, the bank, where I would sit in a quiet room with a safe deposit box and touch a piece of paper that had changed the pressure in my spine. I would not bring it out. I would just sit with it for a minute, the way you sit with someone you love who does not need you to talk. On the way, we passed the West Side Market and the church with the statue of a saint whose face looks like someone's kind uncle, and the corner where a man sells bouquets out of old glass jars on Saturdays. Eileen turned on the radio to a station that plays songs with saxophones and promises. I reached into my pocket and touched the seed packet. The weight of those tiny hard possibilities in their paper sleeve made my palm feel busy, as if the future was work I had already started. In a few weeks, I would press them into the dirt along the flagstones where the cracks fill with weeds, and I would water them, and I would tell them to do what I had just told myself to do. Rise. Hold your color. Fragrance is not required. Being hardy will be enough. At home, the porch paint still peeled, and there was a chip missing from the step where Robert had carried in a dresser and bumped too hard. The door opened to a cool interior, and my house exhaled me into itself. I put the cake server back in its drawer under the tea towels and slipped the seed packet into a little teacup by the window that holds buttons and pennies and the string you tie around a plant to keep it straight. I took the blue ledger out and set it on the table, then took a pen and wrote in neat numbers and letters a thing I had not written in a long time. A line that began with my name and did not include anyone else's. Then next to it, in quotation marks, I wrote the sentence I had asked for the staff room. Dignity is our first policy. I let the ink dry. I closed the book. That night, I slept in my own bed, with my own pillow, and Lake Erie was somewhere out there breathing in and out, whether I paid attention or not. In the very early morning, before the light and the flute sound of a train coming in from somewhere you don't need to go, I woke to the hum of the refrigerator and the tiniest sound of the house, remembering what it meant to hold me. I lay there and thought about the ticket in the bank box and the name on the trust, and the boy who had said, "Yes, ma'am," without a teenager's eye roll. The fortune in that box will move where I tell it. Some of it will move toward things you can see and stand on. Some of it will move toward a set of quiet places no one will ever clap over. But my life had shifted the night I sewed a seam shut and breathed in an air that wasn't mine and called it mine again. Winning the Powerball had been the sharp click, but the turning, the actual turning, like a picture on a wall straightening at last, that was me. In the morning, Eileen will come over with coffee in those paper cups we use when we feel luxurious. Pastor Linda will bring a houseplant she knows I will kill slowly, and apologize to, and finally give back to her to revive. Shonda will send me a photo of cherry tomatoes in her palm, round and red like punctuation marks on the end of a sentence she has been trying to write about rest. Ethan will text me 3 possible contractors for the porch, and I will choose one because I want it done, not because he picked it. Madison and Ellie will ask when the cupcakes are, and I will tell them Saturday. It will not be dramatic. It will be the life I have always wanted to claim and have finally remembered the language to name. The first thing I do, though, before any of that, is open the back door and step out where the marigold bed is waiting. I take my finger and press a tiny hole into the soil. I drop in a seed from the packet, almost too small to feel. I cover it with earth and say the words quietly out loud because sometimes your own ears need to hear you too. Enough. And then, like a psalm you write yourself, begin. Enough, I said aloud to the thin night air. And then, like a psalm you write yourself, begin. The seed was almost nothing between my fingers. Brown, hard, the kind of smallness that demands patience. But it felt heavier than any paper I had signed in a hurry. I pressed it into the soil and covered it. And for the first time in weeks, my hands smelled like dirt and hope instead of lemon disinfectant and form letters. The morning was a bright, ordinary sort of day, as if the world had decided to hum along and not make a fuss about the small revolutions inside it. Eileen drove me to the bank in her Buick, and we parked where the breeze off the lake cut the heat enough to matter. I sat in the little room with the safe deposit boxes and slid the key into the lock. The paper was still folded the way I'd put it in the box the night I'd won. Careful, private, a small folded life that had suddenly widened. I did not open it because I did not need to. It had already done its work. What mattered now was where it would go from me, not into me. Ms. Patel met me in the office later that day. Her navy suit had a pocket square the color of a reserved sunset. She had already drafted the letters and the trust documents we'd discussed at a table that smelled faintly of coffee and legal calm. The second spine trust was thinly described on the first sheet. Trustee, spendthrift protections, disbursements for family, community grants, and a clause that protected my autonomy. I would remain the primary decision-maker for my person while deemed competent by an independent medical professional, and any guardianship petition would require multiple signatures and a hearing. That clause was small, but it felt like a fortress. "I like the way you've written the grant language," Ms. Patel said as she handed me a cup of water. "It gives everyone guidance, and not a carte blanche. You have to make the people who hold this money look at the people it affects," I said. "Money is good at leaving voices out." She smiled. "Then let us put those voices where they won't be missed." The grant documents named specific projects at Maple Ridge: scholarships for CNAs to obtain certifications, a fund for non-medical outings so residents could choose to go to the market or the lake without a question, and new community room chairs with arms to make standing less of a wrestling match. I had written each line slowly. I had let what had been taken from me whisper into what I would give back. It felt right to balance an assertion of independence with the care that had been offered to me, sometimes kindly, sometimes clumsy, inside those beige walls. We told the administrator at Maple Ridge that afternoon. He took the folder like it was something that needed time to arrive. He did not clap. He adjusted his glasses and then read again. "This will make a difference," he said, as if it were a discovery rather than a plan I had set down on purpose. "It will," I said. "And I'll want to see your idea of accountability. Names, timelines, A plaque in the staff room that says, "Dignity is our first policy." Framed, not as sermonizing, but as an instruction. New hires should see it on day one. He looked up then, sudden and real. "We'll do it," he promised. Shonda called me the next day, her voice bright enough that I could hear the ache of gladness underneath. "They're putting names on those scholarships already," she said. And Kevin from maintenance clapped when I told him about the chairs. "He says his back will thank you personally." "I am grateful," I said. "Tell your family I'm sending the tomatoes when you come by next." She laughed, the same laugh that had made the earlier days softer. "You bring any cakes, Grandma Reeves?" "Yes," I said. "Always." For a long while after the gathering, the days felt like practiced breathing. In, decision, out, consequence. The administrative forms were bureaucratic and comforting in their own way. Numbers, signatures, a notary's stamp that meant paper was now more than the impulse of my thought. Filing the documents was less like closing a lid and more like setting a compass down on a map I had drawn myself. Ethan read the envelope I'd given him after the gathering, as if he were reading the terms of a lease on his life. He took it home and opened it with fingers that trembled like a man who finally let himself feel the weight of what his mother was capable of. Inside was a plan that would give his daughters a college fund, a cushion for his business, and a list of expectations. Boundaries, yes, but also steps for mending, for recommitting, for listening. It named counseling as an option, not a punishment. It suggested family mediation for any future disputes. There was a check, not because I needed to buy his loyalty, but because I wanted to remove temptation to make his fear into my dependence. He called me the next week from a hardware store, his voice soft. "You were right about tables," he said. "You hold people in ways I didn't see." He had that boyish edge when he was about to try to say something slightly embarrassing and meaningful at the same time. "I want to learn how to do better," he added. "Can you teach me where the screws go?" It was the small question I had been waiting for, an offer to learn instead of a permission slip to control. We went over paint swatches together and measured the porch while he took notes. And in the doing, 1,000 edits were made to how we spoke to each other. We did not fix everything all at once. Reconciliation is not a single act television writers give you for the commercial break. It is a series of small, brave renegotiations. There were quiet dinners where no one tried to be clever. There were times when he called, and I did not answer, and he left a message full of honest words. There were times he came by and fixed the porch light, because that was his way of saying he could be steady. He learned to ask me where I would like an arrangement rather than announcing it, and I learned to let him take on a task without thinking he was trying to take more from me than he offered. The trust money intended for his security arrived as an invitation, not a takeover. He read the terms and called to say, "I'll do the counseling, and I'll let you pick the contractor." That last part mattered to me. When we picked the contractor together, I wanted someone who would listen to the house and to me. The man we chose had a soft voice and a habit of pausing before committing to a plan. He took the porch's measurements and loved the story of the scuff on the step where Robert had bumped a dresser. "We'll honor that," he said. "We do for houses what you want them to be." When the porch was done, it looked like a porch that had been expected to be loved, with fresh paint, sturdy steps, and a place for a chair where I could sit and read and watch the marigolds do their work. The world did not tilt when the porch changed. It simply fit me better. At Maple Ridge, the changes were quieter and more persistent than any headline. The scholarships were awarded to CNAs who had been on the job long enough to know the work and short enough on money to need the push. One of them was Shonda. She took the classes, sat in the night library of her small rented place with a mug of instant coffee, and then returned to work with a certificate proudly pinned behind her name badge. In time, she accepted a promotion and, with the help of a small loan I arranged, bought a 2-bedroom bungalow with a yard she planted with tomatoes. The first time she brought me a handful of cherry tomatoes in her palm, I cried a little in a way that felt like the right seasoning for a meal, sweet and necessary. The community room chairs arrived in a month, and the staff hung the plaque in the staff room that said what I had asked. It was not a miracle. It did not suddenly remake every attitude that had been formed by schedules and budgets and exhaustion. But small boundaries and visible promises change the rhythm of a place. Residents were invited on outings that summer to walk the market and buy a single peach, and people came back with the sun on their faces and stories that were not about diagnoses. I will carry a photo in my head forever of Mrs. Dwyer, the one who could recite Mary Oliver, standing with a paper bag, laughing because someone had suggested she taste a pierogi, and she had declared it ambitious before discovering she loved it. My own life shifted too. Not because the money made me into something larger, but because it allowed me to be myself without fear of losing the roof under my head. I took a few modest pleasures: a new mattress, a safe heating tune-up for the winter, and a visit to Erie for a weekend where the lake made me feel small and content all at once. But most of the money's work happened in the seams. The support to a friend who needed to finish nursing school, the gift card tucked in the hand of an exhausted aide, the quiet fund to pay for a van to take residents to the shore on a day when their families had other things to do. I watched my second spine plan bend toward community, as well as toward my own choices, and I liked the way the ledger in my sideboard had a new column labeled Gifts that read like a map of gratitude. The cake server found its life back in the drawer. I use it sometimes in small ceremonial ways. To slice a victory cake with the residents at Maple Ridge on the day the benches arrived, to lift a piece of birthday cake for Madison to take home, to sever a spinach pie at a church luncheon with the same careful hand Robert and I had had for decades. It is my bridge, metal, and memory, and whenever I hold it, I feel the weight of everything I have been given, and everything I have decided to give away. The marigold seeds, too, have become a symbol that people notice. Neighbors ask, and I tell them that I plant them because they are resilient. They will grow in cracks where other things die, and they will remind any passerby that someone cares for this patch of earth. There was, of course, a public taste for drama. A local paper wrote a short piece with a picture of me smiling on the porch steps, a headline that flirted with scandal and ended with the predictable tenderness. There were calls from people who wanted to guest speak at retirement groups, and I said no to most. My story was not meant to be a lecture or a trophy. It was meant to be a beginning. I accepted 2 invitations. One to speak at a neighborhood meeting about elder rights, and one to sit with a radio host who asked simple questions and let me answer in the long way I prefer. I refused to let the headlines make me either victim or hero. I am a woman who did not stop doing the little things that mattered because a fortune had arrived. I only used it to make sure I continued to be the author of my days. Peace, when it came, did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived the way sunlight arrives through a kitchen window. Slow, certain, illuminating unconsidered corners. I slept in my own bed, yes, and woke to the hum of the refrigerator like an old friend. I spent afternoons tending the marigold bed with the care of someone who knows how to wait. The girls came over for our first Saturday of cupcakes. We made 7-minute buttercream and decorated them badly and without apology. Madison insisted on adding extra sprinkles like confetti, and Ellie smeared frosting across her nose with solemn concentration. Ethan sat at the kitchen table and told a story about a client who had asked him once about a logo and then decided to buy a boat. We all laughed because that is what families do when they want to be ordinary and safe and close. The most surprising thing to me was how often I felt completely free. Freedom here was not the ability to do anything without consequence. It was the quiet strength of making a decision and knowing I had the right to make it. When the social worker called to suggest another evaluation, I said no and named my reasons. When a neighbor asked if I would think of selling the house to move someplace easier, I told her how much I loved the creak of the second step and the way the light fell on the sink at noon, and she understood. The city of Cleveland did not alter its pace because I had a trust, and that was as it should be. What changed was the confidence with which I navigated it. People sometimes ask me what it felt like to be underestimated. It felt like the wind pushing at your back so hard you think it is trying to move you off a path you intend to walk. Winning the lottery did not change the direction of my moral compass. It made the arrow clearer. I had always known my own mind. The trick was letting the rest of the world see it without shouting. The trust was the device by which I could keep the voice that matters, the one that lives in my chest, at the center of my life. On Sundays after dinner, when the dishes are cleared and the girls are doing homework at my kitchen table like tiny auditors of my choices, Ethan and I will sit on the porch and drink coffee from mismatched mugs. Sometimes he asks questions about the trust, and sometimes he asks if I have ever regretted any of the steps I took. My answer has always been the same. I regret the small moments I let fear decide for me, not the days I chose myself. He nods and wipes crumbs from his chin, and then, like a man comfortable now with patience, he asks about the marigolds and whether he can help plant them. We plant seeds side by side, and sometimes we are quiet, and sometimes we say the kind of things that patch something small and strong in a life that has had many unstitched hems. I keep the blue ledger and write in it sometimes, though fewer lines are for saving now and more for thinking. I signed my name on the top line the other day without anyone's hand in mine, and felt a little burst of triumph that is not loud enough to be showy, but warm enough to keep me company through an evening. The phrase I had asked them to frame, "Dignity is our first policy," hangs in the staff room at Maple Ridge. Someone took a photo and texted it to me. A square frame, a simple font, a promise. Shonda taped a small paper marigold beneath it. That picture sits on my refrigerator now, next to a crayon drawing of a woman with triangular hair holding a balloon. If the cake server is the tool I use to cut celebrations and to mark a new start, the marigold is the metaphor I plant everywhere I can. Seeds are politics that work on time. They will not make headlines. They will not buy a house, but they insist on growing in the face of weather, and they teach me patience. When I see a bed of marigolds along the sidewalk, I feel the same steady pleasure that follows the knowledge that I chose how to live the last chapters of my life. There are days when I wake and still taste the lemon scent of Maple Ridge in my nose like a memory of a place that held me while I decided how to stand. I do not forget that people do good at different paces and in different ways. My victory did not rescue me from the complexity of family or erase the years of small compromises. What it did was give me the agency to say when enough was enough and to begin again on my terms. That is what I mean when I say my life turned. Not with a single dramatic motion, but with the small, steady acts of planting, speaking, and naming. Tonight, before bed, I will take the seed packet from the teacup and set it by the sink. I will run my fingers along the braid of the cake server in the drawer and be grateful for the weight it has taught me to hold. I will think of the women at Maple Ridge, of Shonda watering her tomatoes, of Ethan measuring the boards for the porch, of the girls who ask when the cupcakes are and then steal the marigold flowers off the cake. I will fold my hands and say my thanks aloud, because sometimes your own ears need to hear that you chose well. If my story touches something in you, if it makes you think of the people in your life who have been hurried out of their own choices, or of the seeds you might plant for the future, leave a comment below and tell me. Tell me how you have stood up, how you have held a hand, or how you plan to plant something stubborn and bright. If you want to hear more quiet stories about people who find their voice later rather than sooner, press like and subscribe. There are many more ordinary miracles on the blocks we think are finished. And if you have never planted marigolds, start with one packet and see what stubborn joy looks like in your yard. Begin.